Hare Krishna, welcome back to our Bhakti Yoga journeys course and the discussion that we've been having on the Srimad Bhagavatam. Specifically, we're in the midst of this amazing journey of Narad Muni, how we saw so many twists and turns in his stories, his meeting with Vyasa and how he taught Vyasa what was the main reason for the lacuna he's feeling in his heart, the hollowness he's feeling in his heart, and how Narada explain the science of pure devotional service, that Sambandha, Habide, and Prayojan, the science of relationship, the how to practice that and the ultimate perfection of devotional service. He explained that. And then Narad Muni shared his own personal life story to validate how the power of devotional service as a small 5-year-old boy, what kind of an impact it had, the power of association of the Bhakti Vedantis just for a short duration of 4 months. We saw that. So, in today's discussion, the story doesn't end because now the most dramatic point of the story is going to come now. Because as we saw last time, Narada's life was not all that easy. It seemed like, oh, he just spent 4 months with those advanced souls, with those Bhakti Vedantis, and he attained the perfection of life. No, he also had to go through his own share of challenges and difficulties in life. So Vyasa was keen to know that, and that's the point where we will take up this episode. So this we are now going to continue our discussion from Canto 1, Chapter 6. This further conversation between Narada and Vyasa, and in that context, this I'm reading from text number 2 of this chapter, chapter 6. It says, so what did you, O Narada, do after the departure of the great sages who had instructed you in the scientific transcendental knowledge before the beginning of your present birth? So this is, Prabhupada highlights this aspect. It's called as Sadharma Pricha. Pricha means to ask. Sadharma means eternal truth, that eternal dharma. So it is the duty of the disciple to ask the spiritual master, to ask the teacher, what was their story, what was their personal life experience, right? Because spiritual discussions are not just some theoretical discussions. They need to involve the personal life component, right? And especially today, it's all the more relevant. People like to know their stories. People like to know, right? Yeah, all the theory is nice, but what was your story? So Narada already shared a part of his story, but Vyasa wanted to know, is that all? You just spent those 4 months with those Bhakti Vedantis, is that all? Or was there something more to your story, right? So Narada, he continued further because few queries he had, because Narada mentioned that how in the previous cycle of creation this whole episode happened. So Vyasa was also curious that people can't remember what happened in just their previous lifetime. And in one cycle of creation, people go through millions of lifetimes. So how is it that time did not affect your memory, right? How is it that even though you quit that old body and now you are a new body, right? How come every single detail of your life is so fresh in your memory, undisturbed by time, right? So this is a question that, and eventually at the end of this chapter we'll understand that these advanced spiritual souls, they are not ordinary people. Even sometimes living among us and walking among us, they are not influenced by ordinary material energy. So Vyasa wanted to know the special quality of Narada. What exactly transpired after he received those instructions, after he got initiated by the Bhakti Vedantis, right? So then Narada, he continues further his story, that how these great sages, they left my village because they stayed only for those 4 months of the rainy season, and then I continued, life took over, I started living my life, right? And then he explains his situation, that how he was this only, so remember his mother who was a maid servant, he was the only child, and She had no other offsprings. And consequently, a very interesting usage of the words, he uses a word called as, I was tied by the bondage of affection. It's called sneha anubandhanam. Bandhan, right? Like we learned in yoga also, we learned bandhas. Bandhas means tight locks, right? Bondage. Sneha here means that attachment, that affection, right? So sneha anubandhanam. He says that how my mother bound me with the ties of affection, with the ropes of affection, right? So very, very important. I mean, understand that while Narada's situation may be unique, but the the problems that he goes through are generic, because every living entity in this world has to go through pretty much the similar kind of problems, because the world is designed in a very unique way. In the problem that we are facing are the same. It's just that the individual flavors may change. For Narada, in this case, was the bondage coming from his mother, right? So why, how does this attachment lead to bondage? Why do we get attached in the first place, right? That's an important question we need to ask, because for Narada it was his mother. We all have our own different sources of attachments and the bondage. Why do we get fixated on something? Why does our mind get obsessed, attached over something, right? Because somewhere we feel limited about ourselves, and to fill in that limitedness, to fill in the void that is created by that limited understanding of the self, we try to fill that void by attaching ourselves to something else. Specifically, we try to attach ourselves with the source of with other object as a source of pleasure, as something outside of us is what that will fill the void within me. Because everybody, whether the soul is conditioned or liberated, the nature of the soul is, it is, anandamayo bhyasat, that satchit and ananda. The soul cannot undo its blissful nature, its anandaness. So if it is not able to realize its true inner bliss, if it feels limited because of avidya, it tries to fill in that limitedness by clinging on to something else as its main source of pleasure, as its main source of identity, its main source of self-worth. And that clinging on to something outside of us is what that leads to bondage. And it all begins with the false notion of thinking we are limited. And this bondage can be through many things. It could be through relationships, it could be with certain, sometimes places, nation, it could be with certain things that you may have in your life, or sometimes a particular kind of a situation. So all these things, they, when we become fixated over it, that this is my only source of identity, this is my only source of pleasure, that leads to bondage, right? When we're clinging on to something that we don't need in the first place, right? And in the case, and it's very interesting usage of that statement. If you read this statement very carefully, Narada says, since I was her only offspring, she had no other alternative for protection. Therefore, she bound me with the tie of affection. So if you read this statement, who is being bound? Narada is being bound. By whom? By his mother. Through what? Through the ties of affection, right? But if you actually see, it is not that Narada got bound, or in this case, it's not that the things we possess are bound by us, but rather our attachment binds us to the things in our life. This is the nature of attachment. We many times think that the people, things, situations, right, we are keeping them with us, but actually we are not keeping them with us. They are keeping us with them. So we are getting bound. So it's not that the mother was making her son dependent on her, but rather she was making herself dependent on the child. And this is the nature of material bondage. That's the nature, that is the danger of attachment, right? We many times take it very casually that, oh, it's just some titillation in my head, some attachment, affinity in my head. But how powerful attachments are, right? We are not keeping those things under our possession, but rather those things are owning us now, right? So therefore, a very premature solution to this problem, one may think that, oh, I should not have any attachments, detach from everything, let me just close my heart to everything, to the relationships in my life, to the people, to the things. I don't want any material possessions. Oh, I don't want any comfortable situations in my life. Comfort will lead to attachments. We immediately close our heart, or we become very hard-hearted. But that is also not the solution. Unless we learn to develop a higher connection of love, we cannot interact with the things, people, and situations in our life in a non-possessive way. Right? So the solution to attachment and bondage and that possessive mentality is not to close your heart, but to open your heart to something higher. Only then, until that spiritual connection does not develop, we cannot overcome these material attachments. Material attachment is not countered through material detachment. Material attachment is countered through spiritual attachment. Right? And that is why our real independence comes when we realize our full dependence on the Supreme Lord. And this is the point Narada was trying to teach here. He says, the very next verse, he says that she wanted to look after my maintenance properly, but she was not fully independent. Therefore, she was not able to do anything to me. The entire world is under the full control of the Supreme Lord. Everyone is like a puppet, wooden doll, or a puppet in the hands of the puppet master. So the point here is that, one jiva, one soul cannot take care of another soul, right? That whole idea will only lead to more bondage. We will realize our full independence, our full detachment from matter, when we find our full dependence on the Supreme Lord. So when that higher connection is developed, when we understand that the entire world is under the full control of the Supreme Lord, when we understand that higher connection, then it becomes easy to get over material attachment. Therefore, without developing a kind of a strong spiritual connection, it is not possible to overcome material attachments and the pains that come due to these material attachments and bondage, right? And then Narada, he continues that, I was just a mere 5-year-old child and I had no experience of the outside world. This is an important statement which is important later on, right? And then what happened? Once upon a time, my poor mother, while going out one night to milk a cow, was bitten on the leg by a serpent, influenced by supreme time. Right? He was not blaming the serpent, the snake, for biting his mother. He was not blaming his mother. Mother, you should have carried a candle or something with you. And why did you have to go in the night time? Right? So when disasters come in our life, when calamities come in our life, we very easily try to pacify the heart by finding somebody else to blame. This is the typical psychology of any person in pain. They want to project somebody, the cause of their pain on somebody else and blame them, shun them, put them down, physically, verbally, mentally abuse them. That's how you get solace in your heart, and now you feel good, right? But look at the maturity that this 5-year-old Narada had. He said, it's all due to the inconceivable actions of supreme time. He did not even blame God. Again, this is also this I like to call as theistic blaming, right? This atheist will never do this. Only the theists do this, the immature theist, right? That they start blaming God for, how can God do this, right? It was just a 5-year-old boy. God cannot be so cruel. Therefore, God doesn't exist, right? But Narada, look at him. He just says how he's just by the inconceivable will of time. Nobody can understand. Nobody can comprehend time, right? Of course, at one level, you may say, isn't time the Supreme Lord? Time also the energy of the Supreme Lord? Well, this is a very beautiful understanding that the Bhakti teachers present, that yes, ultimately everything is happening by the Supreme Lord, even just like how the pleasures in our life are coming by God's grace, the pain in our life is also coming due to God's intervention. But when the source of your pain and the solace to your pain are the same person, you will be devastated. Let me unpack this statement. When the source of your pain and the person to whom you will go crying out to find solace, if they are one and the same person, then you will have the most miserable time in your life. This is what usually happens when, especially if somebody has some very troubled childhood, very abusive parents. The child knows that, I am suffering because of my parents. But at the same time, the only people I need to go to for solace are also my parents. So the source of my problem and the solution are one and the same. It's going to confuse the child, right? So, and this also sometimes happens in many toxic relationships, right? So, and one should not project this understanding. Therefore, the Bhakti Acharyas, they give a beautiful understanding that the source of the misery is the impersonal aspect of Krishna as his time energy. But your solace is not that impersonal aspect. It's the personal aspect of Bhagavan, Krishna, who's Bhaktavatsal, who's most dear and caring towards his devotees. And Prabhupada writes a brilliant purport to this. I mean, this one purport, if you or any of your friends are going through a very difficult time in life, you should make them read this purport, right? Very short, but very powerful. Prabhupada, this is the way of dragging a sincere soul near to God. The poor boy was being looked after only by his affectionate mother, and yet the mother was taken from this world by the supreme will in order to put him completely at the mercy of the Lord. So this usage of words is very interesting, of dragging a sincere soul near to God. Usually when you say somebody is coming close to God, we see it as an act of mercy. It's a blessing. But dragging has a very negative connotation, a very painful connotation, right? How can you drag someone to mercy? Right? And this is where we need to challenge our understanding of what calamities are. What should be our mood of looking at calamities? Many times, why are we so averse to calamities? Because calamities, they push us out of our comfort zone. They challenge our concepts of right and wrong. They shake our entire worldview. Suddenly, you almost feel like, the floor underneath you has been dragged out, has been removed. And now you are, falling in this is infinite abyss, this infinite pit. That's how unsettling calamities may feel like. Now, if you are not a very spiritually minded person, then these calamities will seem like the greatest threats in our life, the greatest source of distress. But if you are spiritually prepared, the very same calamities can be seen as great opportunities for personal growth. This is the wisdom that Narada gained internally by spending those 4 months with the Bhaktivedantis. He didn't see this as a disaster. but rather he saw this is the Lord's mercy. That last chain of material affection that I had somehow has been broken. Therefore, it is important to be spiritually prepared, right? And if you think about it, did Narada know 4 months ago that something like this is going to happen? Is that the reason why he even went to the Bhakti Vedantis? Right? Oh, 4 months later, some great calamity is going to come. Let me pack my first aid kit. Let me pack my emergency kit, my philosophy emergency kit. Right? Calamities don't come announced. Therefore, what is the best time to prepare? Now. Now is the moment. Therefore, in the Vedic culture, spiritual training was so emphasized, so strongly emphasized, because the world is designed to create sudden calamities. When life is, everything is going so smooth, suddenly disaster strikes. Therefore, it is always best to be prepared. So if there is any best moment, best time to start your spiritual training, spiritual education, spiritual practice, it is now, right? But how do people of this world look at spirituality? The nature of a materialistic minded person is to deny spirituality altogether. Yeah, what nonsense, what spirituality, right? At least, you know, all of us in this forum may not fall in that category. We definitely do not deny spirituality, but you know how the mind tricks us? By inspiring us to delay spirituality. Yeah, spirituality is there, I know, it's very good, but right now, you know, you have many other jolly things in life to do, right? Focus on all the other aspects. Right now you don't have time. The mind tends to start procrastinating your sadhana, your swadhyaya, right? So the we don't want to be in the category of the materialistic mind, not in that neophyte mind of procrastination and delay. We don't want to neither deny spirituality nor delay spirituality, right? We need to understand from the story of Narada that disaster can come at any time. It is not some kind of an alarmist theory. You know, alarmism means, you know, like where, oh, the world is going to end. Start preparing, start packing your bags. This is not the mood with which Bhagavatam is trying to scare us. Because fear cannot be a very strong, sustainable motivation. But rather, love is the ultimate motivation. So when you read Srimad Bhagavatam, when we approach spiritual books, by the whole science of Bhakti Yoga is where by understanding my relationship with the Supreme, I develop a loving relationship with Supreme, and that should motivate us. So, and when there is love, there is no question of either denying or delaying. That's the power of Bhakti Yoga. That's why Bhakti Yoga can really cement our spiritual practice. Right? So, therefore, Narada, because he was trained, he saw this as a special mercy of the Lord. Right? And that's the, you can say, many times people ask, what is the real test of spirituality? How do I know I have become spiritual? Right? A very, very simple inner virtue that will develop. If you are spiritually minded, spirituality will make us ever so grateful. And the lack of spirituality will make us a great fool. So we have a choice to make whether you want to be grateful or a great fool, right? So Narada, he went through this very, very difficult situation in his life, but was very calm and composed. And he said, I took this as a special mercy of the Lord, who always desires benediction for his devotees. And so thinking, I started heading for north, right? So Prabhupada writes here very beautifully. He says that how the confidential devotees of the Lord see in every step a benedictory direction of the Lord. What is considered to be an odd or a difficult moment in the mundane sense is accepted as a special mercy of the Lord. So this is that mood of gratitude that comes when you start internalizing spirituality, right? And very interesting, when he said he started heading towards north, both literally and metaphorically, right? He started literally heading towards the northern direction, and metaphorically speaking, North, from the Indian context, North has always been seen as a sign of wisdom, because North is where the Himalayas are. That's where the yogis go. That's where all these holy places are, right? Of course, holy places are there everywhere, but North has a connotation that now he started his journey, right? All the theory that he learned in those 4 months now the time has come for him to put it into practice, right? And so after my departure, I passed through many flourishing metropolises, towns, villages, agriculture farms, mines, agricultural lands, uh, valleys, flower gardens. So all the most beautiful aspects of nature. Again, very interesting description here. Try to notice a pattern here. So this verse, he talks about how he's going through gardens and valleys and forests and flower gardens, etc. The very next verse, it says, then I passed through hills and mountains full of reservoirs of various minerals like gold, silver, copper, tracts of land filled with beautiful lotuses fit for the denizens of heaven, with bewildering bees and very exotic locations also he had been, right? Not only the deep forests, but also very exotic locations. And then he says, I also passed through many deep forests of rushes, bamboos, reeds, sharp grasses, weeds, and caves, which are very, very difficult to go alone. I visited deep, dark, and dangerous, fearful forests, which were the play yard of snakes, owls, and jackals. If you carefully notice these three kinds of places that Narada went through, Narada, the first category here of flourishing metropolises, towns, villages, farms, mines, agricultural lands, natural forests, gardens, these are all sattvic places, places in mode of goodness. Then all the places where gold, copper, where economy develops, where again tracts of land, beautiful places which are very, very exotic, scenic locations, which are little bit, they invoke a sense of passion, that rajogun within us. And finally, those deep, dark places where jackals and snakes and owls, snakes, these are all nocturnal creatures. Basically, these are all very, very dark, toxic, tamasic places. So basically, Narada, in his journey, he went through sattvic places, rajasic places, and tamasic places. Or in other words, Narada was exposed to all the three gunas of this world. And Prabhupada, again, very beautifully, he writes a statement that how it is a duty of a mendicant to experience all varieties of God's creation. Right? So while this statement is more specifically for those in the renounced order of life, the Swamis who just, who have renounced the world and they are now only dependent on the Supreme Lord and they travel all alone, it's equally applicable to all of us. Because if you look at it, Sattva, Rajas, and Tamas combined together, what is it? It is this world, the creation. The world, this entire creation is nothing but a creation comprising of these three gunas. Now, Narada going through these three kinds of places, even you and I will have to deal with the three gunas in our day-to-day life. Sometimes we'll deal with very, very sattvic people. Sometimes we have to deal with very tamasic people. Sometimes with some very rajasic people and situations, right? So the point here is that how a seeker never shies away from this creation, from this world. Because the creation has been designed with a very, very unique quality. If you remember in the Yoga Sutras also, Patanjali, he says that the nature of Prakriti is twofold. Bhoga, apavarga. Bhoga means Prakriti can give you gratification or it can also award you liberation. Which means the world can be a source of distraction or the same material energy can be a source of great education. Now, you have a choice whether to see the world as distraction or as education. Because the way Krishna created this world, because many times we look at this world as some kind of a prison house, like this big, we are all put in this prison. In fact, in many immature understandings in the world, they look at God as this big, cruel taskmaster, who created this jail and put us all in this jail and is laughing, ha ha ha, you suffering soul. It seems like always taking pleasure at our suffering. That's not the concept of God, how Bhagavatam describes. Rather, this whole world is an act of love. Because Krishna, seeing the rebellious nature of the souls, he did not want to put us in a prison, but rather put us in some kind of a correctional facility. So the world is designed to be like a school and not a prison. And it is our attitude that defines, am I looking at it as a place of education, or am I looking at it as a place of suffering and distraction, right? So what changes this mindset from a prison to a school, from a place of suffering and or distraction to a place of education, is the ability to see the creator behind every aspect of creation. When we learn to see the hand of God in everything, then we experience education. If you don't see, you will only experience frustration, right? This is the principle that even Narada in the previous chapter, he taught that how ultimately one needs to see that everything is an energy of the Lord. Everything is directly or indirectly connected to the Lord, right? So learning to see this intrinsic connection of every aspect, ultimately everything is an energy of the Supreme Creator. When one learns to see that, and what does it, even if you unpack this statement even more, what does it mean to see everything as energy of the Lord? Meaning, right now I look at the world through the lens of my ego. And my ego wants me to look at things in terms of, is it good for my enjoyment or not? If something is suitable for my enjoyment, that form of material energy is very good. If something is threatening my enjoyment, that form of material energy is bad. So this mindset of ego, this lens of ego, is what we need to change. And when you start seeing everything's and everyone's intrinsic connection to the Supreme, a mood of service comes. This mood of service is what is the mindset change that we need to bring. That how we are not the enjoyers, but we are mere custodians of this material energy. We are not here to enjoy, but here to serve. And the real enjoyment comes through service. That's the nature of the jiva, right? It's like, it's like, imagine a sock, right? Let's say a sock comes alive, right? Your sock jumps out of your, your closet, your clothes drawer, and, imagine it became alive one day. And now it starts thinking, why should I be a sock? Let me become a glove, right? Now, technically, a sock can be used as a glove, but no matter how hard you try, it will be a frustrating experience because your fingers are not accessible. Or maybe the sock will decide, no, let me become a scarf. And imagine tying a sock as a scarf, it almost becomes like a noose. You'll be choking yourself. So no matter what the sock tries to do, it cannot be happy. The best position for the sock is as a sock. So when the point here is that we all have, the jiva has its own intrinsic position. The moment it tries to be anything other than that, it's going to experience frustration. So this change in mindset is what that is important to bring. So then the world becomes a whole beautiful school for us and not a place of suffering. And we have to go through, we have to interact with material energy. You cannot just escape this world. Spirituality is not about escaping this world, but rather going through the experience of the world and learning through this world, right? And therefore, and look at the mood of detachment with which Narada lived. Thus traveling, I felt both body tired mentally and physically. I was both thirsty and hungry. So I took bath in a river, lake, and also drank water. And by contacting with water, I got relief from my exhaustion. Right. So such a minimal life he was living. Right. So not that, oh, okay, I'm heading north. Let me first get my ultra large size backpack. Why? Because I'm going on a spiritual expedition. What am I going to fill my backpack? First, I need 1 month supply of my oat bars, my healthy oat bars with honey, right? Then what else do I need? Oh, I need I need 10 battery packs, because I don't know if I get a charger somewhere to charge my phone. Right? Usually we prepare, myself included, we prepare our spiritual journeys when we go on yatras, when we go on spiritual pilgrimages. I have my whole electronic kit, right? Battery pack, different kind of chargers. What if I don't get the right cable at the right time? you know but look at Narada, what kind of a minimal preparation, what kind of minimalist life that he was living, right? Of course, not that we have to imitate Narada, but let's get inspired by Narada. That if you're like 100% there, at least bring it down to 90% in terms of your consumption, right? So this is the mood that Narada exhibits, right? And then something interesting happens. After that, Narada, he sat down at one point under a banyan tree in the middle of nowhere, and he started meditating on the Paramatma, the super soul within his heart, right? As he was taught by the Bhaktivedantis. And guess what happened? As soon as he started meditating, his mind became overwhelmed with spiritual love. Tears started coming down his eyes. And immediately he could visualize, he could see, he had that revelation, he had that moment of epiphany where he saw Lord Krishna seated right within his heart. As he started to turn inwards in that deep state of samadhi, he could take direct darshan of the Lord within his heart, right? And literally, just like how and Prabhupada also writes very beautifully that how these symptoms like tears rolling down my eyes, these are not the cause for seeing the Lord, but they are the effect of seeing the Lord. So just by imitating some tears, one cannot see the Lord within their heart. But rather, when one actually sees the Lord within their heart, is just the uncontrolled ecstasy that pours out from the heart, transforming to the body through all these ecstatic symptoms like tears rolling from their eyes, hair standing on end, sometimes even trembling and shaking and faltering of voice. All these symptoms of ecstasy manifest when one comes in contact with the Supreme Lord, right? So so then he says that how being exceedingly overwhelmed by these feelings of happiness, every part of my body became separately enlivened. Right? This is like a hypersensory experience Narada was going through. This cannot be an ordinary. It's not that, sometimes even when we watch some highly emotional movie, we sometimes may shed a tear, or when you're seeing a very exhilarating action sequence in a movie, your hair may stand on end. But we are not talking about those kind of material emotions. Every part of his body became separately enlivened. This is like a supremely heightened ecstatic state. And absorbed in that state, he says, I could not see both myself and the Lord. Right? Just this is literally how Patanjali defined samadhi in the Yoga Sutras as well. That how there's a subject, object, and their interaction. All three become one, in a sense that one becomes so absorbed in the object of their meditation that they lose their awareness of themselves, right? They don't even realize their own existence. That is how deep the ecstatic experience becomes, right? This is the deepest state of samadhi that this 5-year-old Narada experienced just by doing 4 months of practice under the Bhakti Vedantis, right? This is the power of devotional service. Then the transcendental form of the Lord satisfies the mind's desires and at once erases all mental incongruities. But then suddenly he lost that vision. And then he got completely perturbed. What's happening here? And he starts trying the same technique again. But this time it doesn't work. Right? And he's wondering, did my teachers give me a wrong mantra? Did my teachers teach me the wrong technique? Right? What is happening here? How come, it worked a while ago and now it is not working? Right? This also shows that how the nature of in Bhakti Yoga, it is not a technique-based practice. Because ultimately, the Lord's vision will be revealed when the Lord decides to do it. Everything is accessed only by the Lord's will. All that we can do is to invoke His mercy. All the endeavors that we make is to invoke His mercy, right? There may be only 1% mercy coming from the Lord, but that 99% effort is needed to draw that 1% mercy. And that's how the nature of Bhakti Yoga is. So that's why it is not a technique-based approach. It's a whole state of refining your consciousness and ultimately waiting. That's why the mood of surrender. When you surrender, you don't demand. You only wait till the grace descends towards you. That's the mood of surrender. That's the mood of Bhakti Yoga. So consequently, Narada, despite repeating his technique, he could not see. He tried again and again and again. He became desperate. He almost became like a madman. Imagine you just experienced the greatest joy of your life and now it is lost forever. Right? Sometimes people lose a precious thing like some diamond necklace or something, and then they go crazy over, oh, where did I drop it? They literally ransack their entire house, turn everything upside down looking for that lost possession. And here, a diamond necklace is nothing compared to the bliss that he experienced. The greatest bliss that the jiva can ever experience in this entire creation is what Narada experienced, and now he lost it. Can you imagine the agony, the anguish that he's going through? And at that moment, seeing his desperation, Lord again appears and says, Narada, in this lifetime, this is it. You are not going to see me again in this lifetime, right? And then he says, so he says, in this lifetime, this is all that you will see me, but in future, in the next lifetime, after this whole creation, this whole cycle of creation is complete, then in that next lifetime, you will get my darshan. And as a consequence, you will remember everything. All these events that happened will be right in your inner consciousness, right? So he says that. So the Lord instructs these instructions, right? And then he says, just to mitigate his grief, the Lord appears, and then we discuss this part. I wanted to read one very, very nice statement Srila Prabhupada makes in this context. Something so special about this unique body that Narada Muni got, right? So he says that at the end of this whole creation, you will still continue to remembering all this by my mercy. So in this context, he says that how the devotional service rendered to the personality of Godhead never goes in vain. Since the personality of Godhead is eternal, intelligence applied in his service or anything done in his relation is also permanent. Therefore, any effort, any endeavor made in this path of devotional service it's never waste, right? In terms of our academic qualifications, in terms of academic, worldly possessions, everything that we earn in this lifetime will be lost in the next lifetime. But the devotional credits that we acquire in this lifetime will eternally be our asset, right? And then he says, hearing this, Narad Muni, he feels extreme gratitude, and he continues his. It's not that he said, okay, anyway, this lifetime I'm not going to see the Lord, then why practice spirituality? Let me start my spiritual journey in my next lifetime. No, that was not his attitude. He still continued his spiritual practice. And thus, I began chanting the holy name and fame of the Lord by repeated recitation, ignoring all the formalities of this material world. Such chanting and remembering of the transcendental pastimes of the Lord are benedictory. So doing, I travel all over the earth, fully satisfied, humble, and non-envious. Right? Very, very powerful verse, this one. Not only does it give us the process of what to do, but it also talks about the inner mindset, the virtues needed, the attitude needed to practice this. How this mood of chanting and remembering the transcendental pastimes of the Lord has to be done by developing this virtue of satisfaction, humility, and non-enviousness. And because Narada was so convinced about the glories of chanting and Harikatha, the pastimes of the Lord, he instructed Vyasa again that therefore write a book which is glorifying these transcendental pastimes of the Lord. Right? What worked for me, I want the whole world to experience this. And so this whole Srimad Bhagavatam was compiled. Right? As a consequence, what happened? In due course of time, I, who was fully absorbed in thinking of Krishna, who therefore had no attachments, being completely freed from all material taints, met with death, as lightning and illumination occur simultaneously. Right? Very, very powerful verse, this one, because for such living, liberated souls, externally we may see as if they have died. But the transition from this life, from the quote unquote worldly life to the liberated life, is such a smooth transition. Just like how lightning and illumination, when a lightning strikes during a storm, you see the lightning and the light follows that, the glow around it, it immediately follows, which means there is no delay. Literally, this is how the transition happens for such advanced souls from this worldly life to the next life, to the liberated life. It happens in an instant, right? And therefore, he says that all his worldly karma, he became like a living liberated soul, right? And then he continues, this is how he eventually ends this chapter, saying that how I remembered all these aspects, all this entire story, everything, whatever happened with me in my previous lifetime, I remembered all of this. And that's how eventually at end of this lifetime, he became an eternal associate of the Lord. All this happened because of his unwavering commitment to devotional service, like that. So yeah, so basically this is, yeah, you can read up these few very, very beautiful verses, and then the chapter ends here with this Narada ending his glories of how the power of devotional service helped him in overcoming what was perhaps the greatest calamity in his life, and which he was able to convert it into a beautiful opportunity that eventually awarded him a position. And Narada is so blessed. Narada is one of those rare spiritual entities who can travel all over the world. And you will see him, he's a participant in practically every important episode of the Lord. Every pastime you will see Narada's presence, right? So that's a specialty of Narada. So thus ends our discussions on, thus ends Narada's journey, and thus ends our discussions on Narada's journey. So it's a very, very beautiful, so we had almost 4 parts as part of this Narada's journey. Every aspect of his life, there is some practical lesson as sadhakas, as seekers, for all of us to imbibe and make our life perfect. All right. So let's open the forum for any quick questions or comments. If anybody wants to add something, any clarifications, any questions. Yeah, go ahead, Apurva.
Prabhuji, I wanted to ask, like you said, that we should not shy away from the material energy. Bhakti Yoga is not about escapism. So, how can we define escapism? Is it detaching ourselves artificially from this world without attaching ourselves to Guru and Krishna? Like, how do we define escapism?
So, in the 18th chapter of the Gita, Lord Krishna defines what is renunciation. Renunciation is also in three gunas, right? When you renounce this world, so usually people renounce this world either out of fear or some personal discomfort. When fear motivates you, in fact, this is a generic statement. Any decision that you take in your life, ask yourself, am I making this decision out of fear or out of inspiration? Right? Even spirituality, for that matter. Am I taking up to spirituality just because I want to escape material suffering, out of fear of material suffering? It may be a good starting point, but it cannot sustain your spirituality for a very long time. Right? So eventually one has to come to a state of knowledge, of understanding the Supreme Lord, our relationship with the Supreme Lord, and that knowledge, will gradually unfurl the love within our heart. So, so the point, so a direct answer to your question is that this escapism, we need to ask, am I making these decisions out of fear or out of some higher understanding? Right? That defines. So that renunciation which is done out of a sense of duty is proper renunciation. Then it's not escapism. Right? So therefore we need to understand. So one extreme is being very foolhardy, saying that, oh, nothing will happen. Let me just run towards material energy, like how a fly, rushes into a fire. So we don't want that kind of foolhardiness, right? At the same time, we don't want to be, because many times what happens, this is also very practical situation seekers begin in the beginning stages they face, that we are more Maya conscious than Krishna conscious, right? We are more afraid of Maya than we love Krishna. Right? And consequently, in all our thoughts, we are only thinking about no Maya, no Maya, no Maya. But by saying no Maya, no Maya, you are thinking more about Maya than to think about Krishna. It's not International Society for No Maya Consciousness. It is International Society for Krishna Consciousness. So our goal is to remember Krishna. Right? So that's a healthy way of approaching material energy. Right? So yes, when one very senior monk once was sharing that how one devotee one time he was saying, oh, I have difficulty controlling my senses, I have difficulty controlling my mind, I have this problem or that problem, right? As he was sharing all this, he was asking, are there any techniques to control my senses and my mind? So this devotee looked at him and says, actually, that is Krishna's job. Your job is to engage in devotional service. Right? Your job is to engage in hearing, chanting, all the different limbs of devotional service. It is Krishna's job to control your senses and your mind. One of the names of Lord Krishna is Rishikesha, the master of senses. And the more you try to do Krishna's job, the more frustrated you will be. The more you try to control your mind and your senses, the more frustrated you will be. So our goal is to become Krishna conscious, to think of Krishna, and it is Krishna's job to control Maya. You don't try to control Maya. The moment you think I can control Maya, that's where your ego is going to take charge of your life. That is also a pitfall in spirituality. Right? So we are not here to control Maya. We are here to be controlled by Krishna, and who eventually can control Maya. That's why Krishna in the 7th chapter of Bhagavad Gita, he says, This Daivi Ashi Gunamayi Mama Maya Duratya. This material energy is my energy. Therefore, it is very difficult to overcome. But Mameva Prapadyante Maya Metam Tarantite. One who surrenders unto me, it's very easy to overcome Maya. Right? So sometimes this is the mind. That is why Vyasa, who gave the Vedanta philosophy and of course, who wrote Bhagavatam, this was the only critique he had about Patanjali's Yoga Sutras. That everything is nice about Yoga Sutras, but somewhere you made surrender an optional thing and said, a yogi can attain samadhi either easily through surrender or through a difficult way by controlling their own senses, by their own energy, by their own effort. There, Vyasa raises a contention saying, you cannot do Krishna's job. Therefore, surrender is the only way. Right? So that's the key theme, and that's the mood that Bhagavatam and the whole Bhakti philosophy talks about. All right. Any other questions or comments before we end?
I also have a question regarding the attachments. So what is the cross line between like enjoying this material world or having like an attachment? I mean, can we have like still enjoy but without being like attached?
Yeah, yes, this is also a relevant question. When we hear narratives like this that, oh, don't be attached, does it mean I should not be happy? Are we some kind of masochists looking for pain in our life constantly? Right? So, no, again, we are not pain seekers. In fact, Bhakti Yoga is all about relishing joy. But the joy comes keeping Krishna as a center of that enjoyment. Like simple thing. You can always go to a restaurant and eat food or whatever. You can cook at home and just eat food. But just by offering that, even before you taste it, just by offering that food to Krishna, saying, Krishna, this is my humble offering to you for today. Please relish it. And let me partake of your remnants as prasad. Right? So this is the mindset of, as Lord Krishna explains in Bhagavad Gita, whatever you do, whatever you eat, whatever you sacrifice, whatever austerities you perform, do it as an offering unto me. So when you make Krishna the center of your enjoyment, that enjoyment purifies you. But when you remove Krishna out of the center, that same enjoyment binds you. So that is why in the Vedic culture, if you look at Indian culture, for example, it's the most colorful, loud, wild, everything is a celebration in India, right? And you'll be wondering, wow, these people talk about spirituality, detachment, and their culture is so colorful. How is it? Isn't it paradoxical? Right? No. Because that same culture that talk about detachment also gave how to celebrate keeping the Lord in the center of everything in your life. When a new child is born, there's a beautiful celebration, a whole keeping the Lord, they're doing kirtan and making the Lord the center. The beautiful rituals, yajna, some fire rituals are all done, and the offering, the food is distributed to all. When there's a wedding, the bride and the groom, right, they sit in front of a yajna and they're glorifying the Lord, and they're offering food as prasad to everyone, to all the attendees, right? Even when there is death, we celebrate death also, because that departed soul has now gone closer to God or has evolved one step closer in higher in their spiritual evolution, and so we offer prayers to the Lord and again offer that prasad to everyone. So everything is a celebration if if we make the Lord a center. So yes, you have to be happy. One Prabhupada's very, very famous statement, chant Hare Krishna and be happy. Right? If you heard that statement. So sometimes people say, oh, when you chant Hare Krishna, you become happy. Right? There's a cause and effect. Many times people interpret it that way. But one very senior devotee, he was explaining that, no, actually, these are two separate instructions Prabhupada gave us. Chant Hare Krishna and be happy. Meaning, as a seeker, we need to relish our devotional life. We have to be happy. We are not embracing suffering. We are embracing celebration. Everything about Vrindavan is celebration. Everything about Krishna consciousness is celebration. Right? So there is happiness. Keeping the Lord as center. That's the point. All right.
Okay,
Let's
thank
end
you.
here. Any quick questions? Anyone? Apurva has one more question. Yes, go ahead, Apurva.
Prabhuji, you said that Krishna is Rishikesh and he will control our senses. Does that mean that we don't have to make any conscious effort to still restrict ourselves? Like someone might like eating junk food, or someone might like listening to mundane music or something. But
Why would you eat junk food when you're eating prasad? Why would you
yeah,
listen to mundane music if you're listening to kirtan? That's the point. So the effort you make is to cook food and offer it to Lord and make it in eat prasad. The effort you are making is to participate in kirtan. Right? So when you engage your mind positively, then there is no negative. See, ultimately, when there is pleasure, there are no cravings. Like Prabhupada would often give this example, when a child is constantly going and playing in the mud, initially the mother may chastise, but the child will be quiet for some time. Again, the child will go and play in the mud. Even if you tie the child, which is not to be done, the child will somehow drag themselves to mud and still play it. All you need to do is give the child a toy. Right? So when there's a positive engagement for the mind will not go in the negative side. That's what Krishna consciousness is all about. Right? So the positive engagement part, we need to make that effort. Then the joy that comes, which Krishna rewards when you engage in a positive activity, the joy that Krishna rewards will make your mind stay away from the negative. That's the part when you say Krishna controls your senses, means he gives you that positive joy. Like that. All right. So let's end here. So thank you so much. So next week we'll continue our discussions. We have another very interesting pastime coming up. Okay. Hare Krishna.
Thank you very